The job was simple, anonymous, and paid better than any legal data entry position I had ever seen in the real world. I was what they called an archivist for a private server on the dark web, which essentially meant I was a digital janitor tasked with organizing and then deleting sensitive data dumps before they could be traced back to the source. I never asked where the files came from, and I certainly never looked at them more than I had to, because on that side of the internet, curiosity doesn't just kill the cat. It gets the cat's bank account drained and its identity erased. But last Tuesday, a folder appeared in my queue that carried a file name consisting of my own social security number followed by the word "final." My breath hitched in my throat as I stared at the string of digits that defined my entire life, sitting there on a screen that was supposed to be filled with corporate secrets and leaked government memos. I told myself it was a coincidence, a glitch in the naming convention of the automated uploader, but my hand was shaking so violently that I could barely click the mouse to open the directory. Inside weren't just numbers. There were high-resolution scans of my childhood medical records, the deed to my current apartment, and a PDF titled Daily Routine that listed exactly what time I left for coffee every morning. I felt a cold, oily sensation wash over me, the realization that while I was cleaning up the digital messes of the world's most dangerous people, they were busy building a monument to my own existence. I knew the protocol. If you find something personal, you report it to the administrator and wait for instructions, but I knew that reporting this would be equivalent to signing my own death warrant. To the people who ran this server, I wasn't an employee. I was a loose end who had accidentally stumbled upon the evidence of my own surveillance. I sat in the dark of my room, the only sound being the hum of my cooling fans and the distant, muffled sirens of the city outside, wondering how long I had been a target. I looked at the daily routine file again and saw an entry for today that was time-stamped for 10 minutes from now. Subject realizes the breach and attempts to flee. The air in the room suddenly felt too thin to breathe, and I realized that the people I worked for weren't just watching me through my webcam. They were predicting my reactions with terrifying accuracy. I didn't have time to pack a bag or grab my passport, because if the file was right, someone was already on their way to ensure that the archivist became a part of the archives permanently. I grabbed my laptop, the only tool I had to fight back, and began a frantic, desperate search through the server's root directory to find the IP address of the person who had uploaded my file. I wasn't just a janitor anymore. I was a man digging through the trash to find the name of his own executioner. I heard a soft, metallic click from the front door, the sound of a professional-grade lockpick sliding into the tumbler with practiced ease. My apartment was on the 3rd floor with no fire escape, meaning the only way out was through that door or a 30-foot drop onto the concrete alleyway below. I retreated into the bathroom, locking the door and turning on the shower to create a wall of white noise that might mask my movements. I scrambled onto the edge of the porcelain tub and reached for the small ventilation grate in the ceiling, my fingers clawing at the plastic until it snapped away, revealing a dark, cramped crawl space filled with dust and old wiring. Above me, I heard the front door of the apartment swing open, followed by the heavy, deliberate footsteps of someone who wasn't worried about being caught. They moved through the living room with a chilling lack of urgency, their shoes clicking on the hardwood in a slow, steady rhythm that felt like a heartbeat. "I know you're in here, Elias," a voice called out, sounding calm and almost bored, like a doctor talking to a patient. "You were a good worker, but you broke the first rule of the archive. You looked at the folder. Now we have to clean the drive." I pulled myself up into the crawl space, the rough wood of the joists scraping my chest and arms, and I squeezed my body into the narrow gap just as the bathroom door was kicked off its hinges. From my vantage point behind the ceiling beams, I could see the glow of a flashlight through the gaps in the floorboards, searching the small room for any sign of my escape. I held my breath until my lungs burned, praying that the steam from the shower would hide the fact that the ventilation grate was missing. The intruder stood directly below me, and I could see the top of his silenced pistol glinting in the dim light as he realized the room was empty. He swore under his breath and stepped back into the hallway, likely thinking I had jumped from the window or was hiding in a closet I had already passed. I didn't wait for him to come back. I began to crawl through the ceiling, moving toward the unit next door, which I knew had been vacant for months. Every movement felt like it was creating a thunderous noise, but the sound of the intruder tearing my apartment apart provided the perfect cover for my escape. I reached the neighbor's vent and dropped down into their darkened kitchen, my legs buckling as I hit the floor, but I didn't stop to catch my breath. I ran out of the back exit of the building and into the rain, disappearing into the maze of alleys that I had memorized over years of living in the city. I didn't go to the police because I knew the archivist's employers had ears everywhere, and I didn't go to a hotel where a credit card could track me. I spent the next 3 days living in a 24-hour internet cafe in the industrial district, using their encrypted terminals to do the one thing I knew how to do better than anyone else. I didn't just delete the files they had on me. I leaked the entire server's contents to every major intelligence agency in the world, ensuring that my employers were too busy running from the law to ever worry about me again. I am writing this from a small town in a country whose name I can't mention, sitting in a library that only has one computer and no high-speed internet. I still look over my shoulder every time I hear a door click or a floorboard creak, and I never, ever open a folder that doesn't have a label I recognize. The dark web might have forgotten my name by now, but I will never forget the sight of my own life being treated like a piece of trash that needed to be thrown away. I survived because I knew how the system worked, but I know that somewhere out there, a new archivist is opening a folder with a name they recognize, and the cycle is starting all over again. The rain was coming down in thick, gray sheets that blurred the world outside my windshield into a smear of neon lights and asphalt, making the late-night delivery shifts feel like a descent into another dimension. I had been working for a third-party peer-to-peer delivery app for 3 months, taking the odd jobs that the bigger companies wouldn't touch because the pay was high and the questions were non-existent. Usually, it was just legal documents or high-end electronics that needed to move across the city without a paper trail. But the package I picked up from the industrial district at midnight felt different from the moment the sender slid it through my window. It was a small, heavy Pelican case wrapped in layers of black industrial tape, and the man who handed it to me didn't say a word, his face hidden behind the brim of a damp baseball cap and a surgical mask. The app gave me a set of GPS coordinates rather than an address, leading me deep into a residential neighborhood where the street lamps were spaced far apart, leaving huge pockets of shadows between the houses. I pulled to the curb in front of a dark, 2-story colonial with overgrown hedges and a porch light that flickered like a dying heartbeat, feeling a sense of unease that I couldn't quite shake. I checked the delivery instructions on my phone, but the screen just displayed a single line of text. Leave it on the porch, do not knock, do not wait. I did exactly as I was told, placing the heavy case by the front door and walking back to my car. But as I reached for the door handle, I heard the heavy click of a deadbolt sliding back from inside the house. I looked back over my shoulder, expecting to see a homeowner, but instead, the door swung open to reveal a man holding a handheld radio that emitted a constant, low-frequency hum. He didn't look like he lived there. He was wearing tactical boots and a heavy jacket that looked too warm for the rainy night, and his eyes were fixed on the package with a look of pure desperation. "Where is the rest of it?" he asked, his voice low and gravelly, sounding like someone who hadn't slept in days. I told him I was just the courier and that the package he was holding was exactly what I had been given, but his expression didn't soften. Instead, it sharpened into something much more dangerous. He stepped off the porch, the radio in his hand beginning to chirp with a rapid, high-pitched sequence of beeps that made my hair stand on end. The drive in this case is encrypted, but the weight is wrong, which means you either opened it or you're working for the people who sent the decoy, he said, moving toward me with a slow, predatory confidence. I tried to explain that I didn't even have the tools to open a locked Pelican case, but he wasn't listening to my words. He was listening to the voices coming through his earpiece. He reached into his jacket, and I didn't stay to see what he was pulling out. I dived into my car and slammed the lock button just as his hand wrapped around the door handle. I threw the car into reverse, the tires screeching against the wet pavement as I backed away from the curb, my heart hammering so hard I thought it would crack a rib. In my rearview mirror, I saw 2 other sets of headlights swing around the corner, boxing me into the narrow street with a precision that told me this wasn't just a random encounter. These were professional retrieval teams from the dark web marketplace I had unknowingly served, and they believed I had stolen data that was worth more than my life. I shifted into drive and floored it, swerving onto the sidewalk to bypass the first car, the metal of my bumper scraping against a brick mailbox with a shower of sparks that illuminated the rain. The chase led me through the winding back streets of the suburbs, my old sedan struggling to keep distance from the blacked-out SUVs that were hovering on my tail like ghosts. I knew I couldn't outrun them forever, and I knew that if I stopped, I would disappear into the back of one of those vehicles and never be seen again. I realized that the only way to survive was to change the game, to stop being the prey and start being a liability that was too loud to handle. I saw the glowing sign of a 24-hour police precinct 3 miles away on my GPS, but the SUVs were already moving to pit maneuver me, their bumpers inches from my rear tires. I grabbed my phone, which was still logged into the delivery app, and I did the only thing I could think of. I hit the emergency support button and began to broadcast my location to every active driver in the city. I shouted into the microphone that I was being hijacked and that I had a high-value package, knowing that the bounty system on the app would draw other curious, desperate drivers to my coordinates. Within minutes, the quiet streets were filled with the headlights of other delivery cars, confused and looking for the payday I had promised in my panicked message. The sheer volume of traffic and the chaos of a dozen random cars swarming the area forced the black SUVs to slow down, their drivers unwilling to commit a kidnapping in front of 20 witnesses with dashcams. I used the confusion to pull into the brightly lit parking lot of the police station, skidding to a halt right in front of the main entrance and leaning on my horn until the doors opened. I watched the black SUVs linger at the edge of the light for a long, agonizing minute, their tinted windows reflecting nothing but the rain, before they finally turned away and vanished into the night. I walked into the station, my legs shaking so badly I had to lean against the wall, and I handed over the delivery app logs to the officer at the front desk. I never went back to that job, and I never took another anonymous delivery again because I realized that in the world of the dark web, the person delivering the package is just as disposable as the cardboard it's wrapped in. The invitation arrived in my inbox as a string of encrypted code that I had to run through a specialized virtual machine just to read, which should have been my first and final warning to delete it and move on with my life. I had a reputation in certain underground tech circles for being a fearless debugger, a guy who could take apart a piece of Onion Link software and find the backdoors before they could do any real damage to the host system. The email promised a high-priority beta test for a new type of augmented reality application called TrueSight, which claimed to use public data leaks and local surveillance feeds to show the users the truth about the people standing right next to them. Against my better judgment, I downloaded the file onto a burner phone curious to see if the developers had actually found a way to bridge the gap between the dark web's data hordes and the physical world. I stepped out onto my balcony at 3 in the morning, the cool night air smelling of rain and distant exhaust, and I lifted the phone to scan the quiet street below my apartment building. The app's interface was clean and professional, overlaying digital tags on the houses and cars parked along the curb, pulling up public records and old social media posts for every license plate it recognized. It felt like a superpower at first, a way to see through the walls of the neighborhood. But then I pointed the camera at a dark van idling at the end of the block, and the screen began to flash a violent, pulsing crimson. A warning message scrolled across the center of the display in jagged white letters. Active tracker detected. Targeting user 01. My stomach did a slow, nauseating flip as I realized that the app wasn't just showing me the data of my neighbors. It was showing me that I was currently being hunted by someone else using the same software. I lowered the phone, my eyes searching the darkness for the van. But the vehicle was completely blacked out, its engine purring with a low, predatory hum that I hadn't noticed until that very second. I pulled the phone back up, my hands shaking so much the AR tags were blurring, and I saw a new icon appear on the map. A small, blinking blue that represented my own location. Hovering right over my dot was a red crosshair, and a distance marker that was rapidly counting down from 100 feet to 80, then 60, as the van began to roll slowly toward my front gate. I ducked back inside and slammed the balcony door, locking it with a trembling hand while my mind raced through the implications of what I had just seen. The TrueSight app wasn't a tool for the curious. It was a beacon for a kidnapping ring or a professional hit squad to find and fixate on targets who were tech-savvy enough to find the link in the first place. I was the one who had invited them in by installing the software, giving them full access to my GPS, my camera, and my microphone without ever realizing I was the prey in their digital safari. I grabbed my keys and a heavy flashlight, knowing that staying in the apartment was a death sentence if they had already bypassed the building's electronic security. I headed for the back stairwell, moving in total darkness to avoid giving away my position through the windows. But every time I glanced at the burner phone, the red crosshair was still there, pinned to my chest like a physical weight. The app began to play a low, rhythmic clicking sound through the speakers, a sound that grew faster and louder as the trackers got closer to my physical coordinates. I reached the ground floor and pressed my ear against the metal fire door, hearing the heavy thud of boots on the gravel outside and the muffled static of a two-way radio. "He's moving toward the rear exit," a voice whispered, sounding so close it felt like the person was standing right on the other side of the thin steel plate. I realized then that the only way to break the lock was to destroy the signal, but the app had locked my phone's operating system, preventing me from even turning the device off. I looked around the trash room, my eyes landing on a heavy industrial microwave that the building manager had left for disposal, and I had a desperate, flickering idea. I shoved the phone into the microwave, slammed the door shut, and turned the dial to the maximum setting for 10 seconds. The machine groaned and a series of bright, purple sparks danced behind the glass as the microwave radiation fried the phone's delicate circuitry and silenced the tracking beacon forever. I didn't wait to see if it worked. I slipped out of the side door and sprinted toward the narrow gap between the brick buildings, keeping my body low and moving through the deepest shadows I could find. I heard a shout from the back of the building, followed by the sound of the fire door being kicked open. But without the digital tether of the app, they were searching in the dark just like I was. I climbed over a chain link fence, the cold metal biting into my palms, and I dropped into the neighboring alleyway where a row of overflowing dumpsters provided a temporary fortress. I stayed there for hours, tucked between the rotting trash and the cold brick, watching the dark van patrol the streets like a shark circling a reef. When the first hints of dawn began to gray the sky, the van finally sped away, its drivers realizing that their high-tech toy had finally gone dark for good. I walked 3 miles in the opposite direction before I dared to stop at a public payphone to call a ride, and I spent the next week scrubbing every digital footprint I had ever left on the internet. I learned that the truth isn't something you find on a screen, and that some invitations are meant to be left unopened in the dark corners of the web. I still don't use a smartphone, and I never look at the world through a camera lens anymore because I know that if you spend too much time looking at the shadows, eventually the shadows start to look back at you.